All right, so my name's Rod Dewar, Head of Solution Management at Fronius. Some of you probably know me anyway. So this is like the second session webinar, which we're going to cover off the Vic Emergency Backstop. We did a session 1 about 2 weeks ago. If you would like to see that session again or see a recording of it, just please reach out to us and we can probably send you a link to look at. So I won't cover off too much old ground from that, just 1 or 2 slides, and the rest will be kind of new information. All right, let's go. Okay, so today, as I said, emergency backstop, as everyone knows, from the 1st of October, then every new system that goes in or an altered system will have to comply with this emergency backstop. So let's see what's in today's session. So I'll just give you a little bit of an overview as what it is, which Victorian DNSPs are involved, compatible device lists, so there's some links for that, some of the DNSP requirements, because they all differ a little bit between each other, then some important stuff for you guys, for the installers, and then do run through the Fronius setup, so right at the inverter, and then on Solar.web, and then a few troubleshooting things that to be maybe beware of, and then we'll have some question time. But yeah, feel free to put any questions in the chat while I'm going. Some of them I may be able to answer. My colleague Marcus is in the background and he'll try and answer what he can. And he'll then answer what he can. And if not, we'll approach that at the end of the webinar. Okay, so what is the emergency backstop? So basically it's a control mechanism which is used by the DNSPs. So they've been forced to do this. From AEMO, so directing from then to remotely shut down or reduce output or export on PV systems during a minimum demand event or an emergency event. The control is done via the internet, and the protocol is just this IEEE 23.5. You may have heard the term CCIP-Oz, and that's the Australian implementation part of it. But you don't really need to know all that too much, just basically to know that it's via the internet, and it's a mechanism done by the DNSPs. So as you probably know, in Victoria, there are 5 DNSPs if you look at just the names of them. However, you only really be going through 3 of them in terms from a control perspective. So that may change, you know, let's say the way the export limits are done or the way their controls are done. So really kind of dealing with 3 instead of 5. So the compatible device lists, which Fronius is on, so all of our inverters, the SnapINverters and Gen24 and Tauros are all on these lists. Can send these through later. So you've got a United Energy list, Citipower, Powercor is combined, Jemena, and then an Ausnet one. And that gives you a list of all the approved products. So this is the fun bit. So DNSP requirements, so these differ between them. So I'll just run through this a little bit. So you've got, as I said there, Ausnet in one category, Jemena in one, and then Citipower, Powercor and United, they're kind of in their own group together. The approved inverters, that's not so important because Fronius is compliant with all of them. But yeah, they need to be CNC listed and they need to be compatible on the website of the respective DNSP. The next line down is semi-important, I guess. So in terms of registering a system, so an inverter or a system and registering with this mechanism, there's 2 ways of doing it. One's called in-band registration and one's out-of-band registration. To kind of simplify that down, what that really means is in-band means it's kind of fully automated once you click the save button in Solar.web, which we'll go through later on. Whereas the out-of-band one, once you hit save, you'll have to copy what they call an LFDI, which is a long form device identifier. You'll need to copy that into the Jemena portal. They will be changing that, but it's going to take 1 or 2 months later on. This is probably an interesting one for you, and that is, what do you call it? Default and export limits with that. So that's if the site loses internet, or this is the limits that you will need to set up statically, and that is a 1 kilowatt one for Ausnet, 0.5 for Jemena and 0 export for Citipower, Powercor and United. So with those ones, they are the default limits that come out. So when you come out with let's say you lose internet connection, the site loses internet, then the system will default to these limits after a certain amount of time. Then the capability test, so that's once you've commissioned the inverter on the site, then you'll need to run through the capability test. This is done within the respective DNSPs apps that they have, or let's say commissioning apps. You will need some amount of export in order to be able to pass these tests. So you can see that with Ausnet, if it doesn't pass the test, then it'll be running in the background for 7 days, or we'll try and run and try and complete within 7 days. Haven't quite worked out how they think that's gonna happen, because if the system gets turned off after inspection, that's gonna be quite difficult. So, but that's probably something you're gonna need to speak to Ausnet about. And same with Citipower, most of them are pretty much, you need to have about 1 kilowatt of export in order to run through the test. So important things for installers. So the system must be online or connected to the internet in order for all this to work. You can get exemptions from the various DNSPs. I'm not fully aware of those methods of how you do it, but you can exempt it, meaning that if you don't have internet or there's no way you can get it there, then you can go for a static limit, and those static limits will be those limits that I mentioned before. Each system will need a smart meter or a Fronius smart meter now on all sites, regardless if it's using the internet or not, because you will need to export limit the system, and that will require a meter. You'll need to update the firmware on the inverter or the data manager, depending on which one you have on all sites. There's a few additional settings you'll need to be done on the inverter and on Solar.web, and then the capability export limit test will be required when you do it on site as well. So what do you need for it to work with a Fronius? So at the moment, single inverter systems or a multi-inverter snap-in system. So if you've got daisy chaining with SnapINverters, that's all done in-house. You don't need any additional hardware. At the moment, due to some delays in the software, if you're doing a multi-inverter site with a Gen 24 Verto or Tauro, these will require a third-party device until about mid-October. Is any of these 3 devices here, Zico Marshall, Catch Relay, or the Village Controller. The in-house solution will be coming with the 1.34 software, which is due in mid-October. So we envisage most of the time, so the implementation of this in general, the emergency backstop, is from application date. So any applications put in before the 1st of October don't need to have this done in the field. So we're hoping that by the time we get the software finished ready for that, you shouldn't have any sites or very little sites that you would need to use a third-party controller. However, if you do within those first 2 weeks, then there'll be some instructions on how to use that with a third-party controller. Okay, so then we've got here, so in terms of the setup, so for a SnapINverter, a data manager, there's kind of 3 things you need to do. This is like kind of in addition to your normal setup that you would do. And that's update the data manager firmware. That needs to be at least 3.31.1-5. That's the latest at the moment. Then set the local export limit. Again, that specify the DNSP for that particular site. And the other thing will be enable cloud control, which is kind of a new feature on the inverter. So once you're on the inverter web interface, then at the top of the screen there's a little icon with an eye icon. You can click on that and you can see it says the software version. If that's not the correct version, the 3.31, then you will need to go and update the firmware, which you just trigger from the device itself. So on that web page there, you go to the right-hand side, firmware update. Then you'll get a page like this, and then you just go to update via web and run update. That's automatically ticked anyway, and you just trigger that, and it'll come up with another window on the screen just saying to confirm, and you hit that, and then that'll update it. You don't have to stand in front of the inverter or any of the kind of things. It'll take about 15 minutes to do that, to update, and then it'll reboot itself and be ready to go. Once you've done that, or you can try it beforehand if it's available, under the settings, under DNO editor, you'll have to go to this the tab down the bottom called Cloud Control, and allow cloud control for grid utility compliance purposes. You tick that, and then you tick the box next to it in order for it to save. If you do happen to forget this on site, we do have the capability of doing that remotely after the fact, but we do encourage you to try and do this as much as possible on site so that it doesn't overload our tech support lines to get this set remotely. For Gen24, Verto, or Tauro, which is using the pilot board inside rather than the data manager, you'll need to update the inverter firmware to at least the 1.33.7, that's the latest one. Again, set the local export limit, and also again, enable the cloud control. So this is what it looks like. So updating your firmware on the inverter, you do that via the Solar Start app. So you download that from the App Store, and then from that, you can actually download the firmware onto it. It does automatically download it if you need to when you're off-site, so that all it does is then push it to the inverter locally. Then you'll see once it's updated in there, you should see the 1.33. If you go under the little the top right-hand corner, there's a little picture of a person, and then you just click on the information, and you can see if that's up to date. And once you go into the menu under the Safety and Grid Regulation tab, then Export Limitation, you set then the export limit, so the size of the system, and then in this case it's 500 watts, and as a soft limit, and then hit Save. So that's your default fallback one. Then you go under Communication and Cloud Control, and then you have to set to on the Allow Cloud Control for regulatory purposes under the technician password there, and hit Save. Then that's all you need to do on site, or let's say it depends if you're doing the Solar.web registration on site as well. So with this one, in Solar.web, some companies have people in the office who do that, so that could be done from the office as well. Obviously, setting the cloud control one needs to be done locally, but all the rest of it can be done remotely if you want to do it via Solar.web. So this is an example of in-band registration one. So this is where you create the site, you put in up above that, you add the device, call it a name, etc. Put in your address, email, as you normally would. Then you see the grid connection section. So there you need to select, this case would be Powercor, put in the NMI, and then at the bottom of that, you'll see an extra thing saying installer use only, tick to register the system for remote DNSP, flex export, or dynamic or emergency backstop. It's all the same thing. So you tick that and then hit Save. And once you do that, then you'll have a box that comes up, which you don't see at the moment, but there'll be a box that comes up underneath it with an LFDI, which is that long form identifier. But in this, because this is the in-band, you don't need to copy that, or you don't need to do anything with it. Once it's hit Save and that number's appeared down the bottom, then the system is registered with the utility server, and you don't need to do anything else there. This is what it looked like with Jemena. So as the moment, it's not all activated in our portal yet. It will be just 1 or 2 days beforehand, before you need to start doing this. We just don't want to activate it now so that people don't accidentally, activate it by without requiring to doing it. So this is what they call the outer band registration. So this is an example. This is like a test system at our office in Melbourne. So again, you put in all the details of the inverter, etc. Grid operator here would be selected to be Jemena. Put in the NMI, and then you tick that box from before, and then what will come up is this LFDI field with it's a 40-digit, I think it is, number that's in there. This number, you'll have to then, at the right-hand side, you see there's a little copy and paste symbol. Click on that, that'll copy that number to your clipboard, and then you need to paste that into the Jemena portal. I think if any of you guys watched the Jemena webinar before, they showed how to do that. and that's in their portal, and you just copy it into there, and then that completes the registration from that point. Okay, so some troubleshooting, I guess. What's some typical things? So obviously this hasn't been done here in Victoria yet, so there will be, I'm guaranteeing there'll be some teething problems. Hopefully not so many from our side, but also from the DNSP side or even installer side. So because it's new to everyone, I'm sure there'll be some things we need to that need to be ironed out. Some of the things we've noticed with a similar type of mechanism for flex exports in South Australia. So NMI, if the NMI is incorrect, so we do have like a checksum or like a regex type check in there, which checks to see if that NMI is a valid one for that DNSP, or it might come up with an error if it's already been used. So yeah, just check, has this been registered by anyone else in the company or another colleague perhaps, or double check that the NMI has got all the digits and there's not a wrong digit in there. If that's still coming up with errors, then you'll need to contact our tech support, and we'll take a look in our back end to see, find out what might be causing that. The other thing would be if the system fails during a capability test. So that's probably the most common one that we see in South Australia. Many things could be causing that. So is there enough export to the grid during the test? So they require 1 kilowatt at least over there. For a Gen 24 system with a battery, what you want to do is you want to disable, or so you can get export to the grid. Either the battery needs to be pretty full, or you can just turn the battery off temporarily while you're doing the test, because otherwise all the excess automatically goes to the battery first rather than going to the grid. So you may not be able to get enough export going to the grid with that. Is the firmware up to date? That happens as well pretty often, that it's not been updated. Is the cloud control activated? We see that every now and then as well, that hasn't been activated, and so it fails the test. And also, is the inverter actually even online as well in Solar.web and sending data? Just as a note, when you're doing tests or seeing if the inverter is adhering to export limits, etc., any of the local limits that are set on the inverter, they are always overridden by the remote ones. So you have like a default of 1 kilowatt on the inverter set. If that's connected to the server and communicating correctly and has passed the capability test, then you will get a higher export than that. It'll be 5 kilowatts or whatever the DNSP allows for that site, even though you have, let's say, a 1 kilowatt set on the web UI on the inverter. That means that the remote controls are getting through, and it's actually overriding the local one. If you do have any issues, if you don't already know the contact details of our support line, so email is pv-support-australia@fronius.com, and the number there is on the screen as well, the Melbourne number 03-8340-2910. Okay, all right, so we'll get into question time. Let me just bring up the questions that have been there, and I'll see if I can answer them. Get on the bigger screen. Okay, so I'll see if I can start from the top. So are you finally going to allow remote access to collect in Australia a screenshot most other manufacturers? So we are bringing out remote access to inverters to at least the Gen 24 range. We're just doing testing with that at the moment, but by the end of the year, you will be able to, as an installer, access any systems remotely on the Gen 24 Verto and Tauro series in order to make any changes or adjustments, etc., as you need it. Is the in-house solution will just be a software upgrade? Yep, that's correct. That will just be a software upgrade, and that can be done remotely. And the only one would be, so no third-party hardware is required, correct? None of that's been required for the single systems. As I said, there is a little bit delay in terms of the multi-system thing, but we're hoping that won't affect too many people or any people by the time we get it out, because of the delay in using the compliance date, or let's say the application date, rather than the install date. So usually from what we hear from installers, it's approximate, at least a week after the application, if not 2. Some of them are even longer than that. So they should that shouldn't affect you guys. Okay, all right. Any other questions out there? Anything not clear? I guess there'll probably, it'll be a lot of learning by doing, I think, out there once that starts to get rolled out, and also teething problems. We have done some testing with some of the DNSPs, for example, with UE, Powercor, and Citipower, mainly with the Powercor stuff. We have had a flexible export trial running, so we know that the communication is working well with that. We are going to try and do, like the week before, with Jemena, do some tests in their production environment. And we're also looking at doing a quick test with Ausnet as well, like a dry run. So we're hoping that they might be able to do things through that, or that work properly. Let's see here. Will the inverters be remotely accessible for other updates, e.g. Wi-Fi? I'm not quite sure what you mean there. So if you're meaning update someone's Wi-Fi credentials remotely, obviously that's not possible because it's not connected to the internet anymore. So if they change their Wi-Fi, you can't get to the inverter to update the Wi-Fi credentials, if that's what you're meaning. What will happen with EV chargers and smart chargers that are scheduled to use excess PV solar? Good question. That's an interesting one. So I think if it's a site that is export limited, then depending on your DNSP, if it's a 1 kilowatt export limit that they ramp it down to, or if it's, then that would probably still pick up some excess. If it's 0, that could be a bit tricky with that one there as well. Yep. So compatible 3 or 4G dongles to Gen 24s if it's flaky. Yep, so with that one there, we do have like a white paper there's a one for Teltonica, I think it's called. So it's not necessarily a dongle, but it is a device that will fit into the connection compartment of a Gen 24. We do have a white paper on that, so just reach out to your local rep. So Victoria is Ansari is our local sales engineer. So just reach out to him, or tech support will also be able to help you out with that one as well. So is Fronius looking at adding a 4G capable data manager or the slot SIM slot? Not at this stage. The tricky thing we've had is getting one that's compatible in many different countries, and then also plans that are there at reasonable costs. It's been very difficult for us to justify getting a dedicated part that will then work in multiple different countries, because the cellular codes and the cellular rules and networks are very different in each country. So because we're spread across multiple countries, that's been the bit of the roadblock or the tricky thing. And then also which network do you go with, because I think most of the ones here in Australia that don't use Telstra, let's say from the other OEMs, correct me if I'm wrong, but they usually use Vodafone or Optus, and I think usually in places where you have sketchy internet, often you have sketchy 4G and capability as well. Okay, at the moment, doesn't look like anyone's got anything else. All right, well, I'll leave it at that. That's it for today. Thanks heaps for joining. And yeah, let's hope that everything goes fairly smooth when the rollout comes, and you all have to be doing this in the field. So you're the ones who are at the coalface, but we'll try and do our best to support you with that through our tech support. And then also we're working very closely with the DNSPs if there's more complex issues where we need to get them involved at their end. So we have internal chats with most of them where we can then get direct access and then try and troubleshoot a site, so that you guys don't have to be swapping between support teams, DNSP or our support team, etc. All right, thanks everyone for attending. Wish you all a good afternoon and knock off, and see you in the next one. Thank you.